We kind of knew the different parts of the brain, but
Mm.
the true understanding of how all these parts work together to translate into what we experience as life, that understanding has come very recently since the advent of functional MRIs and PET scans. Before that, we weren't really aware. Somewhere in the story that we have created, whatever it is that we are trying to spend energy on is clearly not that important.
I am lazy. I often lack motivation, and I oftentimes sit down and try to figure out how do I bring in some level of motivation, push away laziness, and all the other questions we all have in our minds. And so, sometime back, I sat with Sid Warrier to really talk to him about how our mind works, how motivation works, how laziness really functions, and a lot of stuff around that. And I'm dropping that entire episode for you guys to check out. So, before you go there, make sure you hit subscribe and smash that bell icon. I'm Varun Duggi, and this is Take a Pause, going straight into my chat with Sid. Hey Sid, welcome to Take a Pause. This is a chat I've been looking forward to, considering the entire internet speaks about neuroscience these days. I think anywhere you go, there is conversations about neuroscience. I'm like, let's actually talk to someone who knows more about it than what they've read on Twitter or watched on a YouTube video. So, firstly, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Varun. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I want to start off by first asking you, was neuroscience what you were interested in early on when you kind of started off your journey to being a doctor? Was that always something that interested you?
To be honest, medical students aren't really told about the word neuroscience. We are always taught about NEET,
Hmm.
which is entrance exams. That's all that entrance. That's all that medical students are talked about. We only think in terms of ranks and seats and which college, what is the cutoff. So while you are a medical student, you don't really think about life passions.
Hmm.
I had an idea that I liked to study human behavior. That was my North Star. That was the only idea that I had. And then initially I thought I could do psychology. And
Hmm.
then I realized that I wanted to understand about the whole body, which drew me
Hmm.
towards general medicine. And from there, it went down to neurology. And
Hmm.
after I started reading about neurology, there were a few lines in my textbooks that got me very interested.
Hmm.
Like for example, in the textbook that talked about sexual disorders,
Hmm.
there was a line that talked of orgasm
Okay.
and said that orgasm is a non-pathological autonomic dysreflexia.
I'm intrigued to know what that means already.
So lines like that really get me going because I think neuroscience gives you such an interesting way of looking at everyday occurrences,
Hmm.
just your everyday human experiences through a different lens. So that stuff like that really got me intrigued.
I have to ask you what that term meant. You have intrigued me as much as you got intrigued when you heard that. So, what does that exactly mean?
Yeah. So the autonomic system is what keeps you in balance. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic system is what
Hmm.
keeps your heartbeat, your breathing, your digestion, and your sexual activity in balance. So for all these functions to occur normally, your autonomic system has to be in balance. What happens in orgasm is that your autonomic system goes completely chaotic. There is a complete shift from balance to chaos. And in any other life situation,
Hmm.
that would be considered as a critical emergency. We will have to admit that person. But in an orgasm, that is completely acceptable.
A whole different perspective to how you look at a human orgasm in terms of actually sheer chaos is actually a good way to put it, because I feel that
Yeah.
anybody who has been through it will realize what that means
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, think about this. Like if you're breathing that fast and your heartbeat is racing that fast, and all those things, if it were to happen in any other life situation, it would be a panic attack.
Yeah.
But in the context of an orgasm, it's acceptable.
What that also makes me think about is, the most interesting thing about the human mind is that how it reacts while, like you said, like the same exact set of things kind of happening in another scenario would be a panic attack, versus here it's not. um, how do we is there a way for us to almost like at a base level understand, because it's more day to day occurrences for us to understand, okay, this is how our the basics of how our mind works, which we should all know, which, like you said, like most of us don't necessarily learn about it in the same way how we learn about so many different parts of our body. We've never really taught about our brain, never really taught about how it functions when we're in school or even like early college. um, but this part for me is intriguing, because if you understand how that works, you might actually be able to understand yourself better.
Absolutely. I think the reason we are not taught this is because the knowledge itself is uh, evolving so rapidly. And a lot of our understanding has come in the last 20, 30 years. We kind of knew the different parts of the brain, but
Mm,
the true understanding of how all these parts work together to translate into what we experience as life,
mm,
that understanding has come very recently since the advent of functional MRIs and PET scans. Before that, we weren't really aware.
mm.
Whereas the other organs, we knew the heart beating would pump blood and we knew how it worked. But the brain is it's the last bastion. I think the brain and the immune system are the two systems in the body that have been understood at a much bigger depth very recently.
And I've honestly, I know the curiosity of seeing so much of this content online, and I'd love to also know from you why that's suddenly blown up as one of the key things everybody discusses on the internet now is neuroscience. But on the other hand, what I'm also intrigued to see is anything you kind of study when you kind of understand human motivation. You're trying to understand human emotion. You're trying to kind of dig into the fact that even why do we react to certain like situations in certain ways. Like I was talking to my coach the other day, and she was telling me that laziness is is our mind innately telling us that we need to conserve energy for some foreseeable danger coming up ahead. And I had never
Right.
thought of it that way. It just blew my mind when she said that. So I'd want to dig into each of these aspects. I mean, I think we're good to tap into motivation, habits, getting to laziness. I actually want to start with laziness. It's actually, I think, the best topic to start with. So, um,
Hmm.
why does the mind make us lazy?
Yeah, I think your coach had a fairly good point. We are living in a constructed world. Our
Mm,
reality is a construct. And so, somewhere in the story that we have created, whatever it is that we are trying to spend energy on is clearly not that important. So, it's the same thing for procrastination. We say that this is important, but somehow at the basal levels of the brain, where the true decision making actually happens,
yeah.
the priority list is different. And so for that part of the brain, you are actually wasting energy when you could have been doing something much more important for your survival, like watching Netflix. So Netflix has done a great job in convincing our brain that it is good for survival.
That brings me to a very important point. How does the brain even decide what's important and what's not? Because, like you said, it might just tell you that Netflix is far more important to do than for you to actually finish
Yeah,
filing your taxes. I seem to always
yeah.
choose Instagram scrolling over filing taxes. It is literally
Mm,
what I've gone through today on something else, and I was like, why does our mind do that? I mean,
yeah.
how does it make us prioritize maybe the easier thing over the thing you actually have to do?
There are certain things that our brain is wired to prioritize:
Mm,
food, sex, social validation, information, power. So there are certain triggers. Doesn't really change.
mm,
Everything that we are drawn towards is some version of these things. And so I've realized that the reason that society has evolved the way it did is so that it can hijack these existing systems and make sure that people are doing things.
mm.
So when you say that char log kuch kahenge,
Correct.
that is a very powerful motivator, right? Social feedback is a powerful
Mm,
motivator. And so imagine if your entire family had a ritual
mm.
where they would file taxes on one day, and every family member who doesn't file taxes is subject to scorn and ridicule. You could bet that you will file your taxes. But since we are not wired to prioritize it by ourselves, it just slips under the radar.
You become an interesting point. I was reading about why rituals were created, and rituals became a
Mm,
thing across family, across society, so that people stuck to following certain ways of functioning, so that they wouldn't kind of drift away like prehistoric man would. Just be a drifter, and at some point you had to bring rituals to say, okay, no, I can't be somewhere else. I have to be here to do this. Log kya kahenge, and all that, and that kind of comes into it. So do you feel that, do we find ourselves, and that brings me to today's world, then, where on one end we've had these rituals over time, which was a social construct to control how we as human beings function. Then we found the internet, which said you can do all those things, but you can easily kind of slip away, plug in, and do whatever you want. Chaos has arrived. um, However, minds dealt with that. I mean, do you think our mind, someone like, one second, what's going on? Has that has that been a rattling force for our brains, or am I overthinking this one?
yeah. No, I think you're bang on point. And in fact, as a society, I think we have underthought this.
Mm,
Uh, I truly believe that we are very much in a transition phase where our society has evolved to a stage of overabundance, and our brains are still living in a time of scarcity. And because genetics and evolution takes time, we still haven't reset our parameters. We are still very much in that whole let's gather what we can, let's hoard what we can,
mm,
let's that's what leads to clutter. Everywhere there is clutter because we don't really know how to let go of things. Mm, Maybe in the next 50, 100, 1000 years, human beings will figure out that, hey, we don't need so much.
mm,
And when I say figure out, I mean figure out at a limbic level, or a emotional or a genetic level.
yeah.
We are definitely not there yet. So there's basically a conflict between our primal brain and our evolved brain.
You brought up a great point, which is the primal brain and the evolved brain. What's our primal brain? What is our evolved brain? I'm actually going to ask you a lot of like neuroscience for dummies questions today as well, because I feel um, oftentimes we all consume stuff that's super evolved. I mean, we all watch anti-human way too much for our own good, and when he goes deep into that stuff, you feel like you come out with a degree in neuroscience, but you haven't. You don't know the basics. So I'd love you to explain how these two parts of our brain work, and also work with each other.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, calling it two parts is actually an oversimplification in itself. It's kind of like a step by step evolution. So if you think of it like a building,
Hmm,
you have to start off at the foundation, the basement, for first floor, second floor.
hmm,
So imagine if we have reached the 34th floor, for
hmm.
example.
Yeah.
Um, so the 34th floor evolved after the 33rd floor.
Yeah.
At every floor, evolution has taught us another important lesson, some behavior patterns that are important for survival. So the first 10 floors took many, many, many years to evolve.
Hmm,
The last few floors have evolved a little bit quicker. So the prefrontal cortex and the neocortex has evolved a little quicker than what the limbic system has evolved, and that evolved quicker than what the spinal cord has evolved over. So the earlier the evolution, the more ingrained the behavior patterns.
hmm,
So according to seniority, whatever 10th floor says, the
hmm.
34th floor has to do, because a 10th floor guy would be like, boss, I've been in this society way longer than you
I
have.
am the secretary and the chairman.
You have to listen.
Yes.
Correct. So you have to listen to me. So the primitive brain and the evolved brain is a arbitrary distinction. We say that, okay, everything below the 15th floor is primitive and everything after,
Hmm,
but it's not exactly like that, because 16th and 17th will still listen to the primitive brain a lot more than the 30th floor would. And so the job of translating what the 10th floor is saying
hmm.
falls on the 14th, 15th, 16th floor, if that makes sense.
It does, and also from a functionality standpoint, where does base human instinct kick in? Oftentimes, right? I think at points of crisis, when something's really off, That's when we really go back to base instinct. Like, you are going to like fight or flight mode when you are in danger, or freeze. Hopefully not, but I'm a freezer. Most times I will freeze. Yeah, fight, definitely not. So either flight or freeze is my two base instincts whenever any danger kind of comes. um,
Yeah.
Apart from those, what else does the chairman of the society tell the upper tenants? Ki, these are things you have to
Yeah.
do. This is where I take over, and I'm not letting you guys have that late night party.
Mm. It also tells the newer tenants what to look for and what to get in, what to pay attention to. So suppose if the eyes can actually see 100 things,
Hmm.
all the images that the eyes will see first goes to the limbic system.
Okay.
The limbic system will quickly approve, okay, this is important, this is not important. And so what your prefrontal cortex or what your evolved brain is actually seeing is only things that have been approved by the limbic system.
It's like sensor board.
So the limbic system has to decide. Yeah, absolutely. It's like a sensor board. You think you're seeing everything, but you're not.
Oh man. Never.
So there was this line that I had come across in a textbook or in some book on vision, neurobiology of vision,
Hmm.
that says, "Do you tell your eyes where to look,
Hmm.
or do your eyes tell you what to think?"
Oh, wow. That is so interesting because it's true. Hmm. I think we tell our eyes what.
Yeah, it's
I
like a
think the first
circular
option is
thing.
what I would pick. The more I think about it, I'd pick the first one. I feel
Yeah,
the brain directs traffic way too much in terms of what we focus on, what we do, and this is where I want to kind of move towards motivation. Right. I'm super intrigued to
mm,
see what motivates people. Um, because you're
yeah,
surrounded by so much motivational content all over the place. Um, I am as guilty as most people of sharing a lot of that, but I feel at some level, what motivates us to do what we do, to want to do the hustle, to do the grind, to have goals, to move towards it. If you want to, if you are at a point where you don't have motivation a lot, and I think most people do suffer from that. Many, you want to find that motivation, which is why it is such a need for people to consume motivational content. Um,
right.
how do you innately make your brain find almost that track of motivation, in terms of just how it functions?
Mm. This is the billion-dollar question,
Yeah,
isn't
of
it?
course.
Every single person in the world would want to know this, and
This is a question for Instagram Reels, is how I call it.
yes, change my life in 30 seconds. Who
Yes,
wouldn't want that?
exactly.
That so what is very interesting is that that in itself shows such a laziness on the part of the viewer, right?
Yeah,
That I want you to improve my whole life, but I can only give you 60 seconds to do
exactly. Yeah.
it. Or I'm going to watch dance videos.
Yeah, or move on to videos you're going pointing in
Yeah.
different directions and moving from that. But no, yeah, because if you think about
Yeah.
it, we're all trying to find motivation, trying to be productive, or rather understand productivity. Like, have my own issues with
Yeah.
overproductiveness, or rather propagating too much productivity in that sense. Is there a science to motivation?
There is. We have understood at the neurochemical level what is it that what is the driving engine of our behavior.
Hmm.
And there are several driving engines. There's not just one. Because for something as important as action or human behavior, we cannot rely on only one. So there are several engines in the brain. One of them is the fear network. This is one of the most primitive ones. Anything that is about to hurt you or harm you, you are intrinsically motivated to get away from that. The flight fright response.
Hmm.
Uh, Freeze doesn't really work in the long run.
Yeah.
Eventually, you have
Yeah,
to
eventually you get eaten.
either fight, yeah, either fight or fight. Uh, so the other motivators would be something that is driving you towards something,
Hmm.
which is essentially giving you some kind of advantage for your survival.
Hmm.
That could be love, that could be food, that could be security, safety, power.
Hmm.
So these are inherent motivators of behavior.
Yeah.
At the neurochemical level, what is very interesting is that there is both short term and long term motivators. So short term is a chase for acute dopamine spikes.
Yeah.
So that is a very powerful thing, but then that does not sustain. And eventually there is tolerance.
Mm,
So you give somebody sugar, you give like a rat a little bit of sugar, and then you keep on giving it, and after a while it gets used to it.
mm,
And so the especially if you're giving it at a very periodic interval, the amount of dopamine spike it gets keeps decreasing, because hey, there's no unexpected nature of it. It's
yeah.
predictable now. So I don't get as much pleasure out of that same lump of sugar. Whereas if you keep a variable reward, if you give it 2 days and then you don't give it for a week, and then you give it, oh, there's a huge dopamine spike. That is also part of the whole lottery system, right?
Mm,
People use this all across. You may win. Scratch a card. Maybe you will win.
yeah. 1 million chance you might make it. You make it once. It's also why people say that when you go to a casino, you end up winning in the beginning, but you don't win towards the end because you want that high you got on the first win, and you'll never get that same high at the end of it.
Yeah, right. It's so that itself is a very short term motivator where you're chasing a dopamine spike. What is unfortunate is that these days most addictions work like that.
Mm,
Most, yeah, all addictions work like that. You are getting a short term dopamine spike, and there is a gradual tolerance built up, so you need to get more of that same thing to feel that same amount of pleasure.
yeah.
The long form of motivation is what is much more sustainable, which is anything that guides you towards well-being.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the interesting part about that is when you talk about this, and I know there's enough been spoken about this, is that that short-term bursts of dopamine and its connection to social media is obviously I think the most spoken about thing in the world, and the fact that so is social media going to be the cigarettes of our generation or the generation right after us, and all those pieces there. But I feel more than that, it brings me to an interesting point, saying that maybe things that over a period of time give you that level of rush might actually be better for you than short bursts in that sense. And from what you said, that's what I'm inferring, saying maybe watching a movie isn't that bad a dopamine rush than
Mhm.
watching a 60-second reel, maybe. And we've gone to the
Yeah.
short bursts versus the long version, and that's why it's affecting us the way it is.
I have developed a kind of like a theory on
Mm,
this.
mm,
I believe that we are wired to chase happiness, but we are wired to chase happiness by putting in effort.
mm,
So anything that you have put in effort for uh, is is physiological. I don't think it can harm you. Okay, so
mm,
this is just my own theory that if you are getting that much dopamine, have you put in the effort for that? Have you
mm,
put in the equivalent effort to do that?
mm,
And whenever you suppose you're chasing a meal,
mm.
you are also supposed to work it off
Yeah, true.
in some way or the other. You're supposed to work it off because that's the cycle of energy. You take in something, you work it off in gaining more energy,
Yeah,
and that's fine. What is happening is that we are living in an epidemic of obesity
so
of
true.
everything,
Yeah,
right? Obesity of nutrition, obesity of information, knowledge, access to everything. So we are not working it out, we are not spending it.
yeah.
So I think if you're watching a reel, I don't think there's anything wrong in consuming reels or TikToks or anything. But then one good parameter of health would be that are you using it in your life? Are you
Mm.
writing a blog about it? Are you talking about it? Are you making a video about it? Anything. If you're using it, I think it's fine.
I love the idea of digesting it out or using it, because I feel that makes so much sense, right? And it's also, I think, in your head, you're telling yourself that you're doing this for some value,
Mm.
and somewhere innately it gives you, like, for instance, I consume a lot of content. That content allows me to create content. I consumed a lot of books, and that allowed me to write a book. So at some point, I'm like, all that is worth it because it has led to something tangible in that sense, right?
Yeah,
And I feel
I
in
love
many
that.
ways that's the one piece we kind of miss. I feel that oftentimes when we talk about why someone gets motivated or why someone's trying to be productive, etc., you're not talking about in the long term, all you're working towards is happiness. You're just trying to find a way to optimize every single aspect of your life through your mind. Say, I just want to be happy. And I, I, I I listened to this podcast called The Happiness Lab that Dr. Laurie Santos does.
Yeah.
I just started to do her Coursera course. I haven't gone beyond module one yet,
Mhm.
because I found it interesting. I'm like, one second, there's a course on happiness. I'd love to kind
Yeah.
of dig
This is the
into it.
one she teaches in Yale, right?
Yeah, the one she teaches in Yale. Yeah,
Yeah. Even I took that course.
and I was super intrigued to understand because I find the fact that there are ways for you to study very specific things like this, even though it's a small course, it's a good way for you to understand how your own mind functions.
Yeah.
And I want to flip this around and actually ask you, for someone who knows how all this stuff is wired, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with us dealing with your own motivation? Dealing with you're telling yourself this is my you know all the where the wires are, right? You know what wire is talking to which wire,
Yeah.
from where to where it's going, but you still are human. So
Yeah.
how do you deal with
Very
that
much so.
balance of like just really taking this is why it's happening, but you are innately human. Your instincts are innately human. How do you deal with that?
um, the way I think about it is that it's kind of like knowing car mechanics.
Hmm.
Even if you know how the engine works, how the brake works, even then, if you go on a road trip, you would still pretty much enjoy yourself or struggle as much as anyone else.
Yeah.
It's just that when something has gone wrong, you have a little bit more of an edge in just knowing, okay, this is probably why this is happening,
Hmm.
and you know when to call for help a little sooner.
Yeah.
You may know that because you have some inside awareness, but other than that, I think you would enjoy the trip and have fun with your friends just like everyone.
I actually want to ask you about why you started sharing content around neuroscience. And I know that initially, because of deep research by Peter, who's silent on this recording, um, that you start off with poetry content and eventually move to this. At which point did you switch from being just a medical practitioner to being a medical practitioner and also a content creator?
Hmm. I have always loved sharing something that I have thought about or created.
Hmm.
So I grew up in a very musical household. My mom is a music teacher. So
Nice.
right from when I was a kid, um, I would perform in my school musical, the dancing, not dancing, like I would be the one who was singing.
Hmm.
I would never be the, I would never, I was never good at dancing, but then uh, I've always enjoyed being on stage.
Hmm.
And what is interesting to me is that now we are living in a generation where everybody is feeling that.
Yeah.
Somehow social media has brought the stage home. Like everybody is on stage all the time, everybody is
Yes.
performing.
Yeah.
uh, I think in my generation, some of us just got a head start. That's all. Because most of my friends are not, in fact, comfortable on stage, and
Hmm.
it's a useful skill to have, just being comfortable talking in front of people. I always used to like writing poetry ever since I started reading Enid Blyton books.
Hmm.
I used to write poems as a kid. When I joined medical college, I started writing medical poems
Hmm.
because you write whatever is in front of you.
Yeah.
um, and so I started sharing that. YouTube was just, I think I started the channel in 2012. It was inactive for almost 10 years. Once in maybe 5 years, I would put up some poetry video. That's it. Uh, and then this shift to doing content on neuroscience happened very serendipitously. I was once the lockdown happened, I just asked a few students on Twitter that,
Hmm.
hey, do you want me to take some neurology clinics for you? I know your medical college is shut.
Hmm.
I'm at home. I'm not particularly busy. Do you want me to take neurology classes for you? And some of them said yes. Almost 120 of them said yes. So I
Wow.
started taking neurology clinics. Some of them couldn't attend. I remembered that, wait, I have a YouTube channel. Why don't I upload this over there so you can watch it later? And from there started. From my neurology discussion, somebody asked that, oh, while you're talking about Parkinson's disease,
Hmm.
why don't you tell us a little bit about the mental health problems that Parkinson patients face?
Hmm.
And from that, I started talking about mental health overall. And from there, started talking about religion and art and psychology. Then, one thing led to another.
I think I remember watching your content first when you did a bunch of stuff with Tanmay. I remember watching that and I'm like, this is so, because there have always been things to science which were taught to us, I would say, in the most boring way possible. If science was taught to us like we're all realizing now, like I'm almost like I should stop talking about my age. Telling people I'm almost 40. I am almost 40, but it's like my standard line. Has Varun mentioned his age yet on this piece of content is now going to be a thing. But I just think back on how I learned science. And I think about how we can consume science now. And to understand ourselves, understand the world around us a lot more. I feel we might have had more scientists if we were taught that in a different way. But I guess scientists of tomorrow is learning stuff on YouTube now.
Mm. And why not, right? Because I feel it is so counterproductive to not learn about science.
Yeah,
Human beings are inherently narcissistic. Can we just accept that?
exactly. I
we are
agree.
we are
100%.
we are obsessed with ourselves. We want everyone to talk about us. We want everyone to tell us who we are, why we are, how we are. And science is exactly that. Science is basically your story. And
Mm,
biology is especially your story. It is about your body, your brain, your heart.
yeah.
So learning science is actually the most narcissistic thing you can do.
Now, if someone told you that about science, you would study science, not if you were taught the way I think many of us were taught. And what also happened, I feel, because of that is because those were taught to us in this very refined but largely boring systems. Is like, okay, we know enough about it. Let's move ahead. So even if tomorrow somebody asked you about it, you will remember what you learned in maybe school and you will talk about it. And but I feel in today's world, because you're constantly almost on a beginner mode, right? You're like, okay, I didn't know anything about this at all. This seems fresh. I want to understand this more. I didn't know anything about that. Um, we're always on this whole beginner's mindset of sorts. And I want to ask you about that because I'm intrigued by the beginner's mindset because it asks your brain almost to forget what it knows and say, start fresh, maybe refine out some of the biases you kind of built into it. Um, how does our mind work when it's trying to switch towards being a beginner again?
Hmm. I first realized that we do this, or the importance of doing this, when I was playing Rummy.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're a card player, but
I
when
have
you
played Rummy though. I used to be a teen patti player for the longest time till
oh
at some point it became unhealthy, so I stopped.
right, right. Yeah, I'm recently on a poker discovery journey myself, but
I
yeah,
haven't
we'll talk
fallen
about
down
that.
that rabbit hole. I have people have tried to get me into
Yeah.
poker. I have played a few times, but I'm one of those people who will try to win once, and that's never enough.
Hmm.
So I don't know when to stop, and I feel that with cards, especially, you need to know when to stop. I remember first played in college way back in the day, and I would be this obsessive player, constantly wanting to play. And I think at some point I said, okay, "This is not healthy for me. Let's stop." But I do occasionally, like Diwali, I
Yeah.
enjoy playing cards, and that's I think I leave it to
Yeah,
that
yeah,
once a
correct.
year.
That's just like traditionally acceptable card playing. Uh,
Exactly. You can lose and say it's a festival.
yeah, भगवान के नाम पे ठीक है, it's fine.
Exactly.
So when I started playing Rummy, we used to take these long Kerala
Mm,
trips. So we would go by train, and the earlier train trips to Kerala used to be over 36 hours. So we would get in at Bombay, and then 2 days later we would end up in Kerala. So that's where I used to
mm,
play Rummy with my whole family, and I understood the importance of. So if you're holding 13 cards and you have to spot patterns between the cards, and you have to arrange the cards in triplets or in sequence, and sometimes you are stuck, and
mm,
constantly waiting for that one card, and it really helps to just close the deck and just shuffle it up and then open it, and then you might spot a completely new pattern, and you will find yourself
mm,
rearranging the whole set, putting out two cards that you earlier thought were very important, but now you'll throw it out, and now suddenly you win the game, just by
mm.
letting your mind have that little break, and then now you can see the whole picture differently.
That is so interesting. I'm forgetting what wasn't this something which Einstein used to call, if I remember right? it's a way of play, right? You move away from something, you come back to it, you find the solution immediately because you wiping
Yeah,
the blank, by wiping your brain blank
yeah,
rather. It kind of goes into that
yeah. It's
space.
like just distracting yourself, because what is very interesting is that pattern recognition is happening despite whatever you're doing. So if you're trying to
Mm,
solve a particular problem and you're too engrossed in it, try to solve a different problem. Go solve a piece of
mm,
Sudoku for 5 minutes, and then
mm,
come back, and you might
yeah.
find that you're because you are carrying your Sudoku pattern recognition here to your original
Mm.
problem, and then you might spot something very different.
Which actually tells me that if as human beings we are only focused on doing one thing in our lives, we might solve less problems than if we did many things and we had many interests. Would that be a way to
I
infer
think
what you
so.
just said?
I still believe that you should be good at one thing, but I don't think you
Mm,
can be good at only one thing, because there are different. Every skill set is complemented by other skill sets, right? And
mm,
I remember, especially if you're a gamer, if you're say if you've ever played FIFA or PlayStation, any football game, you
yeah.
know that if you're building a character, you can't just put all your points into just speed or strength. You need everything. You need agility, you need
Mm,
heading, you need dribbling to make a complete footballer. And so you similarly for life, I feel that if I want to be a very very good doctor, I should know a little
mm,
bit of performance poetry. It helps. It helps to
yeah.
know when to take a pause when you're talking to a patient. It helps to know when you can crack a joke. It helps to know when you cannot crack a joke. So just being on stage does help. So I feel that different skills complement each other.
How do you take a pause since you mentioned it in life? Obviously, you're juggling between being a practicing doctor as well as um, being a content creator. How do you take a pause?
Mm. So I take pauses in very small bursts, because I find that I don't really need it. For me, a change
Mm,
acts like a pause. Somehow,
mm,
when I'm in the hospital and then I come back, and I sit with my wife, I talk to her, talk about the day, discuss what's happening. And then when I sit down and start reading about neuroscience, it doesn't feel like work.
mm,
And then when I've created content or I've streamed at night, and then the next day I say I shoot a podcast, and then I go to work, it doesn't feel like work,
mm.
because it's a change. It's different. And so I feel that even if you're taking a pause, what are you doing? You are just trying to give your brain a rest from whatever it is that you're doing before, and that could mean
Yeah,
anything.
true.
So it's yeah, I feel like having a change in itself is a pause.
That is so interesting, and it makes sense, right? Because if you look at it, we're all trying to be, especially we have the ability finally as human beings to be multidimensional. You can kind of go from a varied set of things and have like multi hyphenated, almost like bios of sorts, because you can do multiple things. And when you're actually jumping from the right thing to the right thing, it many ways does give you that sense of, you feel that okay, that something's kind of
Yeah.
become a break. And I've also realized that finding things to do which don't involve too much brain
Mhm.
requirement anyway, but are still fulfilling. Like I like to brew my own coffee.
Oh, love.
Like not use a machine as much. Sometimes do manual brewing and stuff like that. I find that to be super like taking a pause, because I'm like, while that process feels longer than what it would take to normally make coffee, there's something nice about it. And you feel like you're doing something, yet you're not really doing something. And that kind of gives me that sense of break. I actually want to ask you this because I read that you are trying to change your relationship with food, where you're saying, okay, when I'm only going to you're trying out fasting and you're trying to say I cannot detach from. What is your relationship with food right now?
Oh,
What's going on?
very very recent story. This I have always been.
Mm,
I've always enjoyed eating. It would
yeah.
it I feel that I would, even if I'm alone, I would take effort to make sure that I have things in front of me that I like. I arrange my room, if I'm reading a book, or if I'm watching something, I want to make sure that everything is set, and I enjoy that process. But in the last few months, I have been reading more and more about metabolic health, and how it's not really our fault, but the way that the market is structured now, we are basically consuming a lot more than we need to. So even if you
Yeah.
try, you cannot burn it off. It's very difficult to burn off everything that you are consuming on an average day. And especially since I have a sedentary lifestyle, except for the time where I'm working out or swimming, because as a doctor, I'm
Mm.
sitting, as a content creator, I'm sitting. There's not much of
Yeah.
field work, not a lot of that. I have a car, I would drive around. I realized that I do need to change my relationship with food. It's not that I don't enjoy it anymore, but I am
Mm.
closer than ever before to feeling that fasting should be a part of our lives. um,
Mm.
and so I recently did a video for Ultra Human, and I have to do one
Mm.
more. So this video is going to be entirely on intermittent fasting, just to get used to the idea that fasting is not a threat. And once I
You're wearing the glucose monitor. You have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
patch
yeah,
on your arm. Like I've seen so many people around
yeah,
me
yeah,
these
yeah.
days.
So the patch is there. It's just I mean, that itself is just an excuse. But even after the
Mm.
experiment is over, it is something that I would like to continue. Also, because all the evidence points towards it. Even our traditional value systems, all traditional value systems, in fact, talk about fasting. So
Mm.
I think it is something that I would like to incorporate into my life that is presently not there.
I've seen a bunch of schools of thought on this one. I don't subscribe to. I think any side I've chosen to be non-committal is I've said to people I know who are constantly doing like long term intermittent fasting. They're fasting for a long period of time, only eating meals in batches. I've been doing that now for many of them doing now for a couple of years now. There's another set who have also taken that to an extreme where they've gone like 36 hours,
Wow.
48 hours, even longer sometimes, and then
Okay.
eating after that, which I find to be
Hmm.
extreme in that sense. Now, one is to kind of do that, and I understand what fasting does, but um, I'd want to know because now you're studying how this affects us as well as you understand how the mind is. Um, but I'll come to the other part. I want to first ask you how does doing this, how does it work between our brain and our body? Because in a sense, you are telling yourself, I might be hungry, but I'm not going to eat.
Hmm. Right. There is both short term and long term effects. In the extreme short term, I think it would be quite discomforting. Like, for example, today I've had breakfast, and I'm having a cup of coffee right now, and I will just directly have dinner after this. This is part of something that I'm trying out because I'm otherwise healthy. I feel that I can take this. I have reserve enough that I can experiment now with my own body, with my own
Mm.
food habits. Definitely would not recommend somebody who already has diabetes or something to try out something. You should
Yeah.
talk to your doctor and do this. But in the long term, what happens is that extra fat in your body releases something called as leptin, and leptin is what
Mm.
is supposed to regulate your brain's decision making regarding food. And
Mm.
your brain develops something called leptin resistance, which essentially means that even if there is leptin in your body, your brain cannot really process it, and so you will still feel hungry, you will still eat. So at some point you have to ask yourself
Mm.
that, wait, so if I am still hungry, is it that I am actually hungry? Is it that my body needs it? Or is it that my brain doesn't know that my body has enough food and is still telling me?
Yeah.
So is it a communication problem? And that is a difficult decision to make. So chances are
Yeah.
that, just like insulin resistance, more and more people are on that spectrum of leptin resistance. Definitely something that we should, as a society, think about, because it forms the underlying principle of how obesity is connected to depression and how diabetes is connected to depression, because all these things are part of one spectrum.
It's interesting that when you say that, right, is that the tendency for someone who is already unhealthy because of an unhealthy eating lifestyle to eat unhealthier is very high.
Yeah.
versus someone who actually eats healthy, I think in essence does continue to eat healthy,
Yeah.
and it might not have as much of a. So I fall on the other spectrum of like people who don't put on weight that easily. Um, so for me, it's a constant thing to tell myself I am hungry. Like I'll forget to have lunch just by instinct, and I will suddenly at like 4 p.m. be like, okay, why am I kind of feeling a little off? Oh, I forgot to have lunch. The number of times I've had a day when I will be say, okay, I
Right.
forgot to have lunch, is very high. So I'm the other spectrum. I feel I don't know if that's the way to put it, where you've naturally never had the need to eat till your body's gone extreme and say, dude, hello, wake up, you forgot. So I fall into that side of things.
What's very funny for me is, it's also interesting that people who are underweight and who are trying to
Mm.
bulk up say that they have a tougher job than people who are trying to lose weight. And the
Yeah.
argument between these two camps is, it's so heartfelt. Both ends of the spectrum are struggling.
I've been told by people saying that, why don't you just, what do you mean you have trouble putting on weight? It's a good thing. I'm like, no, it's not. I've tried my entire life. I've finally come to the point where I understand how to make
Yeah.
it happen and keep it stable. Because I went the extreme of like really putting on more weight and getting bulkier, and I realized how much that
Mm.
tired me out, and it just generally made me more lethargic and everything else. I went swung
Yeah.
back to just focusing on being fit. But in many ways, for me, it was that eternal struggle of something like, do one thing, एक काम करो, निकाल के मुझे दे दो ना. Yeah, make it, निकाल के दे देता हूँ तुमको. So I've been through many of those
Yeah.
conversations in life. Uh, and continuing on the food topic, the other end, I've always wondered, and see, I've always been the person who will buy the Apple Watch to track whenever there's a new thing there. We'll get, we'll want to get the newest thing to find the newest data. For some reason, with glucose monitors, I have told myself in my head that maybe I don't want to look at that data,
Right.
and I just want to focus on how I'm feeling about it. Am I feeling hungry? Am I not feeling hungry? Do I need to eat now? Not eat now? Um, I'm trying to do it the old school way, if that's the way to call it, because I have enough people around me who are now got the monitors and they're checking and so, oh, this is how the last meal affected me. This is when I should
Right.
shift it around. I have a feeling I will eventually succumb to FOMO and get it, but
Right.
I'm trying to understand that, is this constant focus of
Mhm.
tracking um, how we're functioning as human beings, and looking at these metrics, because we look at metrics on everything, right? Content, look at metrics, you look at metrics on. Do you feel at some point, um, will that also be something that will be a negative
Yeah.
for us?
I think it will. I would definitely not recommend that unless somebody is a diabetic with hypoglycemic episodes at night, or maybe an athlete who's on a very strict diet and a very new diet. I think glucose
Hmm.
monitoring should be a transient thing. Maybe you do it once in your
Hmm.
life, or maybe once in 2 years, just to see how your body's
Hmm.
reacting to carbohydrate intake. That's
Hmm.
it. Other than that, the reason that we look at Instagram metrics is because there is no natural way for us to know how the reel is doing.
Yeah,
But that is not true with glucose. That's not true with heart rate.
that's true.
So there are inbuilt
Yeah.
feedback mechanisms. It's just that we have now become blind to it. We are not sensitive enough to it. So this is just a way to increase that sensitivity, to increase that awareness. But then after that, I think we should just let our own biological feedback take over.
I think I'm also not doing it because I don't want some an app to tell me what I already know, which is that I should not have had those two cookies at 9 p.m. last night. And so at some point, I'm staying away from that information hitting me in the face because I already knew about it enough.
Yeah.
Um, I want to tap into a few more things because I mean, the more we're talking, I'm kind of thinking about, because we're surrounded by so much information about neuroscience now on the internet. What is the weirdest thing that you have seen that people claim this is how our mind works, which you innately know is not true? What have you seen people propagating, which is definitely not like, this is not fact? Please stop sharing this.
Wow. So
Too many.
funnily enough, not so much of neuroscience stuff. Although I do find
Hmm.
those memes of serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine,
Hmm.
a little too oversimplified. Mm. But then again,
Mm.
The way I feel it is that it's good that at least the awareness of those terms are spreading, right?
That's true.
Because if people don't even know what, and no one can understand all of it at once, no one can share
Mm.
all of it at once. So it's I think it's okay. I would I think it's fine to err on the side of oversimplification for the sake of
Mm.
spreading awareness. Because once somebody learns that, okay, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin are neurochemicals, then later on they may go
Mm.
into a little bit depth and find out how they're all connected to each other. But if they don't even know the terms, then no further discussion can happen.
Yeah.
I think what is far more
Yeah.
dangerous is when people talk about the psychology of certain mental health problems and
Mm.
oversimplify it in terms of you can have depression because your partner is talking to you in a particular way. A study shows that so
Mm.
that the danger there is that people can take that home and make actual life
Yeah.
consequences, and which is not something that should happen.
This is what my father calls Dr. Google. He says that whenever I turn back with my own diagnosis of what I'm going through, he's like, "Have you gone to Dr. Google? Is this why you're giving me your own diagnosis of how things are going?"
Right.
I'm like, "Sorry, I've done that," and he's like, stop diagnosing yourself. You're not a doctor." I feel it's also that, right? I think for everything we try to find a solution without having to go to an expert, especially when we should. I, for the longest time, claimed to the world I had ADHD
Mm.
because I've always had an attention problem. So, we've all joked that, oh, Varun's got ADHD. I've claimed I have ADHD. Then one day I said, okay, I want to actually figure out if I do. So I went to a therapist, and I think within 15 minutes said, "You not even close to having ADHD. You have autonomy." I'm like, what's that? Now I'm interested. Now I want to know more. And then she got deep into the fact that my issue is not the attention, but my issue is that if someone tells me how to go from, I can go from point A to point B if someone tells me to, but if someone tells me how to go from point A to point B, my mind is like, dude, no, I will figure my way through.
Right.
Um, and I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Mm.
So I feel the problem is also that it's like we associate ourselves and then we research what that means. And then we go deep down that rabbit hole and we take those symptoms, we assume we have them. Our mind has thought of what it's saying. Boss, you have all these symptoms. You might not have had them before you read it. Um,
The-
so that's been my learning about just like Googling stuff and finding those facts and going down that rabbit hole because you can go very wrong with your own
100%.
diagnosis. Let's
And
be
this
honest.
happens in psychology, especially. There is a chapter on defense mechanisms in the medical textbook. And the
Mm.
day that defense mechanisms are taught, that night in the hostel, every single medical student goes to sleep thinking that they have around 14 to 15 defense mechanism activated. And out of that, 4 or 5 are abnormal ones. So they all go to sleep thinking that they are psychiatry patients. And it takes some time before you realize that, everything is a spectrum, and it's because only the pathological terms are available to us that availability bias kicks in.
Mm.
We are not told
Yeah.
about what does ADHD look like in the normal side of things. Similarly
Yeah.
for OCD, similarly for depression,
Yeah.
similarly for anxiety, every mental health problem is on the spectrum of normalcy. And just because you're feeling sad doesn't mean that you're depressed. Just because you're feeling anxious doesn't mean you have anxiety disorder. But since everybody is talking about anxiety
Mm.
disorder, somebody who's anxious might self-diagnose and say that, you know what, I have anxiety disorder, and then fit
Yeah.
in all the other definitions to himself or herself.
I started off this conversation by saying that there's so much information out there on the internet, but I feel in some ways there are things. My larger inference is there are things that we should know about how our mind works and how our body and our mind connect together and how that flows. But um, when you go beyond a level, go to an expert. Don't come up with the theory yourself. Um, or you'll just end up with theories which make no sense to when you might have gone down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole so much.
It can be
Um,
paralyzing, no?
and yeah, it's paralyzing, and more than anything else, I feel that most of us now genuinely also want to learn more. Like I would gladly today. I was talking to someone who was a doctor. I'm like, today he asked me what today you want to go study. I'd love to study psychology. Like it would innately be what I would want to study. I didn't know what I wanted to study when I was in my 10th standard. I'm like, today run and do like a psychology degree. And I'm a person who's always said education is overrated because I never enjoyed education. Um, is there something you would go and study today if you had a
Yeah,
chance?
so psychology would definitely be one, because I feel that I'm already circling around it so much from the neuroscience perspective that I would love to learn officially what current
Hmm.
2022 modern day psychology is talking about, and it is on the books. I am planning to do that sometime. It's my plan for between 2023 and 2024. I want to get another degree, which I promise myself I will not do, because at one point it was like a it was like an addiction. I had my friends making fun of me. Ki, Acha, Auric, bus ho gaya. But one more. This is the last one, I swear.
I might just go and do it. I have I don't have as many. I spent too much time studying engineering. I spent 6 years finishing a 4 year degree, so I've
Same.
overqualified as an engineer. And then did mass comm. But I think
Mm,
today if I had to go, um, I met. I remember recently, and I was so intrigued. Saying, I met I think a 19-year-old who said he wants to go study a combination of economics and psychology, and I'm like, that kid's been taught well in school. Uh, I would have never thought about that combination when I was
for
in
sure.
his age.
People have so what is very interesting to me now is the concept of dual degrees. So I love that.
Hmm.
I truly believe that the future is going to be ruled by people on intersections. You might have a
Yeah.
combination of the two weirdest life skills ever, but if you stick to them, you'll find that you are in a niche field.
And for someone who actually operates at an intersection, which is you, between being on the medical side and being
Mhm.
content creator, thank you so much, Sid, for coming on the show. It's been fabulous. As always, I've stuck to my clock, which is what I constantly look at.
Brilliant.
But I'm pretty sure this is only going to be one of the many conversations we'll end up having on recorded, unrecorded on this topic because there's so much to unpack. But I think this has been a good start to talking about how our mind works and everything else.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me, Varun. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for coming on Take a
Same.
Pause.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. We're dropping a bunch of these conversations over here for you to get the full enjoyment of the podcast, start to end. And make sure you hit subscribe because there's lots more to come and some super duper surprises only for subscribers. So make sure you do that right now. Also, the bell icon.